Ukraine has been waiting months for 90 billion euros. The money was approved. The mechanism was in place. The frozen Russian assets were identified. Every EU member state had signed off except one. Hungary, under Viktor Orbán, withheld its consent and attached a condition so extraordinary it bordered on the openly adversarial. Ukraine would need to restore the flow of Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline before Orbán would release the loan. That condition kept 90 billion euros, the equivalent of $105 billion, locked out of Ukraine's defense procurement pipeline, while Russia's missiles kept hitting Ukrainian cities. On April 22, Péter Magyar won 53% of the Hungarian vote. Orbán is gone. The first tranche of the loan is expected in May. Ukraine is about to go shopping, and the shopping list begins with Patriot missiles and Storm Shadow cruise missiles. To understand what the unblocking of this loan means in specific defense terms, the two priority systems need to be analyzed in the context of Ukraine's current capability gaps. The Patriot air defense system, specifically the PAC-3 MSE interceptor variant, is the only Western origin system that has demonstrated reliable intercept capability against Russia's ballistic missile threat to Ukrainian cities. Russia has been executing ballistic missile strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure, urban centers, and military facilities that Ukraine's shorter-range air defense systems cannot reliably engage. Patriot batteries in Ukraine have demonstrated intercept rates against these threats that no other available system can match. The constraint has never been technical. Ukrainian operators have proven proficient with the system it has been supplied. Each PAC-3 MSE interceptor costs approximately $4 million. Sustaining a meaningful intercept rate against an adversary with Russia's ballistic missile inventory requires interceptors at a scale that is directly limited by available funding. The 90 billion euro loan removes that funding constraint in a way that no previous single financial decision has. The Storm Shadow cruise missile, known as Scalp in French service, addresses a different but equally critical gap. With a range in excess of 250 kilometers and a penetrating warhead specifically designed for hardened and underground targets, Storm Shadow gives Ukraine the ability to strike at command infrastructure, logistics nodes, and military installations deep in Russian-controlled territory and within Russia itself. Ukraine has used Storm Shadow strikes to significant effect against targets in Crimea and occupied eastern Ukraine. The constraint again has been supply rather than capability. More Storm Shadows means more reach into the rear areas that Russia uses to stage offensives, store ammunition, and coordinate command. The 90 billion euros gives Ukraine the procurement budget to acquire both systems at a scale that matches the operational requirement, rather than the politically constrained trickle that the funding situation has previously allowed. The Atlantic Council has noted that Magyar's victory removes Hungary's obstruction not just from this specific loan, but from the broader EU decision-making process on Ukraine. EU sanctions packages on Russia have required unanimous consent. Orbán's negotiation of carve-outs and delays on sanctions decisions has historically given Russia additional time to adapt to each package before it takes full effect. The pace at which sanctions can now be tightened and enforced will increase. The information dimension also has defense implications that extend beyond the financial. Reuters reported on April 8 that Hungary's Foreign Minister Péter Magyar had offered Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov copies of internal EU documents on Ukraine's accession process. The same official was documented coordinating with Moscow on ways to ease sanctions on Russian individuals. From a defense intelligence perspective, this means that EU-level discussions about weapons deliveries to Ukraine, accession timelines, and sanction strategy were potentially being transmitted to Moscow in real time through an official diplomatic channel. That channel is now being closed. Quick note, you're watching Defense Wire. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. The broader capability picture for Ukraine following Magyar's victory needs to be understood through the lens of EU integration rather than bilateral aid. Hungary's obstruction of Ukraine's EU accession process has had defense implications that go beyond any single weapons system. The Atlantic Council's assessment is that Magyar's victory makes it significantly more likely that Ukraine's integration into EU security structures, including defense industrial cooperation, joint procurement mechanisms, and standardization frameworks, will accelerate. Ukraine has been developing one of the most capable drone manufacturing and deployment ecosystems in the world during this war. Integration into EU defense industrial structures would provide access to European supply chains, funding mechanisms, and partner nation manufacturing capacity that Ukrainian drone producers currently access only through bilateral relationships. Hungary's veto over EU enlargement decisions has been one of the formal mechanisms through which this integration has been slowed. Magyar's government will also no longer maintain the energy relationship with Russia that Orbán used as a lever against EU sanctions coherence. In September 2025, Orbán's foreign minister claimed that Hungary could never stop purchasing Russian oil because it had no alternatives. In 2024, Orbán explicitly refused to walk away from Russian gas, citing a 15-year deal Hungary had signed with Gazprom. These positions kept Russia's energy revenue from Hungary flowing into the war chest, while every other EU member was making the costly transition away from Russian energy dependence. Under Magyar, Hungary's energy policy toward Russia is expected to move toward the European mainstream, not instantly, and not without transition costs, but in a direction that will further reduce the revenue streams that have been sustaining Russia's defense spending. The defense-relevant bottom line of Orbán's departure is a four-part capability upgrade for Ukraine. First, 90 billion euros in previously blocked funding becomes available for defense procurement, beginning as early as May. Second, Patriot interceptor missiles and Storm Shadow cruise missiles, the two highest priority systems on Ukraine's procurement agenda, can now be purchased in quantities limited only by production capacity rather than political obstruction. Third, EU decision-making on sanctions, weapons transfers, and accession moves faster and without the information leakage that Szijjártó's coordination with Moscow represented. Fourth, Ukraine's longer-term integration into EU defense industrial structures accelerates, providing the supply chain depth and partner manufacturing capacity that Ukraine's drone and weapons programs need to scale beyond what bilateral relationships alone can support. Hungary was a small country with 41,000 soldiers, but positioned inside the EU's consensus architecture, it was worth more to Russia than any division. That position is now occupied by a government that is not Putin's mouse. The procurement calendar for Ukraine just changed significantly. If you want to understand how the Patriot system and Storm Shadow missiles will be employed now that Ukraine can procure them at scale, check out our breakdown of Ukraine's defensive and strike capability gap. And if you want to see the broader strategic picture of how EU financial mechanisms and Russia's frozen assets combine to fund Ukraine's war effort, our analysis will give you the full accounting. Subscribe to DefenseWire so you never miss what comes next.